It's fair to say that Jon Snow is a slightly important character to the A Song of Ice and Fire series. He did have the most viewpoint chapters in the most recent book, A Dance with Dragons, and he is easily my second favorite viewpoint named Jon, and obviously he has a big role to play in the story to come. A case could be made, a very strong case, that he is the Song of Ice and Fire. He is both ice from his mother Lyanna and fire from his father Rhaegar Targaryen. However, how much those parents matter is a massive variable in the story right now. We saw Game of Thrones go through revealing this information to the audience 3 times because they thought the audience was stupid, but that information really didn't end up mattering at all. Jon had pretty much nothing to do with his Targaryen heritage, nor did he make any claim on the throne. The only purpose of Jon's Targaryen ancestry was to make Daenerys go crazy. Today, we're going to examine some elements of Jon's parentage in the book. Not whether or not he is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, I personally think that's a foregone conclusion, but the elements at play that could cause Jon to be a legitimate Targaryen and more of a political entity unto himself in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. So why is examining Rhaegar and Lyanna's relationship status important here? Well, if they weren't married, Jon Snow is still Jon Snow. He's not Jon Sand. The bastard name is from where you're raised, not where you're born. So he was raised in the north. He's still Jon Snow. And if he is still a bastard, he has no rights to inherit unless he is legitimized by royal decree. Given that no current claimant would want to legitimize Jon, even if they believed this information, most notably because he would be ahead of he'd be ahead of Daenerys, and if Aegon is legitimate, he'd be just behind Aegon. But overall, I don't see any reason why either of those claimants, nor Tommen, would legitimize this Targaryen claimant to the throne. In the show, the idea of annulment is brought up. Gilly discovers it when reading at the Citadel, which I guess is a payoff to her learning how to read, but it's still kind of dumb. And there really isn't any strong definition given for an element other than, like, that's just when you set a marriage aside. They don't go into what it takes to set a marriage aside, as there are some strange precedents for that in Westeros and the World of Ice and Fire, and I'm going to look into those right now. In Westeros, divorce is not a thing. We'll get to that in a minute because I do have a specific thought on divorce in the Seven Kingdoms, but there are situations where individuals can put their spouses aside. Most notably, a marriage that has never been consummated can be set aside by the High Septon or a Council of the Faith. With that said, we have never seen that be done in the main series. It definitely will happen. The main likely case is Sansa Stark, given that she was wed to Tyrion Lannister, but they never consummated their marriage, though we really don't know what a Council of the Faith looks like, and the current High Septon, the High Sparrow, obviously has pretty distinct political agendas. I could see that coming into play if Sansa were to end up wedding Sweet Robin or even Aegon Targaryen, as she is a very crucial political player there, as it currently stands, she is the key to the North unless Rickon resurfaces in One Piece and is able to claim his birthright as a 4-year-old. I think he's 4 in the story right now. With that said, we know that the marriage between Rhaegar Targaryen and his previous wife, Elia Martell, was consummated, as they do have 2 children together, Rhaenys and Aegon, which, I mean, if Rhaegar was going to name his kids after the Three of the Conqueror, he should at least go in order. So the first one should have been Visenya, even though Visenya was less popular. She was the eldest of these 3 siblings, and she did survive the longest. That's interesting. Definitely dark magic there. But it is worth noting that we really don't have any evidence that there would be a basis on which this marriage could be fully annulled for not being consummated, as they did supposedly have 2 children together. I was recently rereading A Storm of Swords, and that was my inspiration for making this video, as I think there was one line that really stuck out to me as kind of weird, and I thought it could be used down the road, but I don't think it's particularly likely. This next section is firmly tinfoil hat territory. I don't 100% believe it, but I thought it'd be interesting to share regardless. Notably, in Oberyn Martell's introduction, he's riding with these Lords of Dorne and talking with Tyrion as they ride into King's Landing. It's different than the introduction in the show. He's not in the Brother there, though I do think that the introduction in the show is quite strong, but that's neither here nor there. Specifically, in this conversation, Oberyn is talking about coming and demanding justice, and he begins to discuss his relationship with his sister Elia. He says, quote, "As children, Ellie and I were inseparable, much like your own brother and sister," which is a weird thing to say. Like, at this point, Stannis has already sent out his letters to every lord in Westeros, Martell's included. They're a great house, and Stannis definitely would have really appreciated their support. So Oberyn saying that his relationship with Elia was like Jaime and Cersei's relationship is kind of weird, and I don't know why he would do that unless he's trying to insinuate something or just trying to make a jab at Tyrion. That is definitely the more likely possibility, but it is interesting at the very least. Also, sidebar, this video is entirely inspired by family law, which I am currently taking. We learned about annulment last week, and I thought it'd be interesting to look at that in addition to having the thought about Oberyn and Elia and A Storm of Swords, which, man, that's kind of a weird passage, right, guys? Also, subscribe, like the video, that typical YouTube stuff. I really appreciate it, and it does really help the channel. Sorry, the sidebar over. If we are seriously considering Oberyn and Elia as a pairing, which I hope we're not, we do need to look at the phenotype. We do have the seed is strong as a very important part of the series. And looking at the kids, Aegon is said to have pale hair. The kid we meet, who is supposedly Aegon, does have pale hair, but he's probably not Aegon. But Rhaenys, the first of these two children, does have dark hair and very Dornish features, and the king, notably, will not go near her because she, quote-unquote, smells Dornish. I am not suggesting that Aerys had some preternatural inclination that Elia and Oberyn had this child and essentially cuckolded Rhaegar, but I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about, and it's something that Rhaegar maybe could claim if he's trying to get an annulment. But with that said, that annulment would need to come from either the High Septon or a Council of the Faith, neither of which would really be present in Dorne, where the two of them were hiding out. They hid out at the Tower of Joy, which is in Dorne, and the Faith of the Seven isn't really a big focus there. So it's unclear as to exactly how that might have happened. It's also worth noting that Targaryens with fully Dornish features are not entirely unprecedented, most notably Baelor Breakspear, who was in line for the throne. He was going to be the heir of Daeron the Good, Daeron II. We'll meet him in Dunk and Egg, but he does not look like a Targaryen. He supposedly looks very Dornish. So there is a possibility that it was just Elia Martell's features dominating Rhaegar's, so I don't think that idea is likely at all, but I thought it was a fun thought experiment. In order to discuss what I think is the main possibility as to how Rhaegar's marriage to Lyanna will occur in the books, we need to look at two Westerosi kings and the reason why divorce doesn't exist in this world. If we're looking at the real world, the main reason that divorce was sort of invented in Christianity, at least specifically, was from the will of one particular notably bad English king. Henry VIII wanted to remarry, and the Catholic Church would not let him. They had power over him. He didn't like that, so he created his own church, the Anglican Church, essentially just to give himself the power to get a divorce, which, I mean, I respect. If we look at two specific Westerosi kings, there are some notable resemblances to Henry VIII. I've considered making this an entire video in and of itself, who is Westeros' Henry VIII, as there are two candidates who pretty heartily match that description. Aegon IV is a big one, in addition to having a similar number structure in terms of looking at Roman numerals to Henry VIII. He looks a lot like art of Henry VIII that we have from that era, and we do know that he had a ton of affairs with a ton of different people. But it is worth noting that he didn't marry any of those people. He had a million billion bastards, but none of them were legitimized until his deathbed decree. He wasn't married to any of their mothers, whereas Henry VIII is very distinct for having 6 distinct wives. Alternatively, we do have a Targaryen king who did have 6 distinct wives, that being Maegor the Cruel. Maegor ended up just kind of adding on to his current marriage as he wasn't happy with the first one and she wasn't giving him children, so he just kept adding on wives in the hopes that, oh, maybe this one will give me a kid, maybe this one will give me a kid. And none of them ended up working, but he didn't divorce any of them. Polyamory is something that the Targaryens have dabbled with from the start of their dynasty, but really not picked up in a very long time. Aegon the Conqueror obviously had 2 wives, both of his sisters, Rhaenys and Visenya, not in that order in terms of birth, and Maegor had 6 wives, at least some of which were married in a very specific ceremony. In House of the Dragon, we see the marriage between Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen, performed in this strange Valyrian rite that we really don't know much about. We know that Maegor took some of his black brides to wife using a Valyrian ceremony, essentially adding them on in this practice of polyamory that did occasionally happen to the Valyrian dragon lords. It's unclear exactly what that ceremony entails, but we do know that Rhaegar is seen as kind of a second coming for the Targaryen dynasty. He is very much going going back to the old ways, focusing on prophecy and magic again in a way that many Targaryen rulers before him really didn't. So I think if there is a chance that he did marry Lyanna Stark, I think it was probably going to be in these Valyrian rites of polyamory and not him annulling his marriage to Elia Martell, as the show says. There is another possibility, but I don't think it's particularly likely. I could see that once this reveal is made by whoever, by Sam, by Howland Reed, by Bran, Jon could end up lying about his legitimacy. He's always wanted to be a trueborn, he's always resented the fact that he's a bastard, and once he's come back from the dead, it seems fairly likely that he'll have a fair few less scruples about doing anything dishonorable or just kind of the ends justifying the means. With that said, I don't think it's particularly likely, and I think that the one thing that the show did well with Jon's parentage and reveal is that he was very conflicted about it and what it did for him. With that said, I don't think there was really much conflict there beyond like him and Daenerys having conflict because she was suddenly suspicious of him. I think in the book it'll be a lot more him actually being internally conflicted because he has sworn himself to Dany by that point or to some other ruler, and he maybe wants that power for himself. We've seen him want Winterfell. Perhaps he wants the Seven Kingdoms as well once he's returned from the grave. There's also the very distinct possibility that Rhaegar wed Lyanna as a salt wife and has adopted the faith of the drowned god, insofar as Ironborn are allowed to have both one stone wife, their rock wife, their essentially lordly wife, and then salt wives are these women that they marry on raids, which kind of matches what he did with Lyanna, and they can't essentially inherit unless all of their trueborn children are dead, which I could see Jon using as a method of getting in there. I don't know. I think that if Aegon's not legit, Salt's son Jon Targaryen is going to be coming for him. Overall, it's unclear exactly what role Jon's parentage is going to play in the story going forward. It most likely will make him a contender for the throne, and in order for that to happen, Rhaegar has to have had his marriage annulled or have married Lyanna Stark in some manner, unless Westeros gets more progressive really quickly. There are a number of ways in which it'd be able to happen. I doubt we'll have as concrete details on whatever happened as maybe we would like, given that I don't know if we're going to see Bran looking at it down there, because as far as we've seen, his vision has been tied to weirwood trees, and we have no records of weirwoods in Dorne, as they do not seem compatible with that kind of very desert environment. I think Jon Snow's parentage is going to have a much bigger role in the Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring than it did in the Game of Thrones show, but I mean, that bar is in hell, so I look forward to seeing it regardless. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me and supports the channel, and it's free. And while you're down there, be sure to comment. Let me know what you think. What do you think Rhaegar did to get rid of Elia Martell, the poor lady, and why should he have married Jon Connington instead? I'll have many more videos in the near future on A Song of Ice and Fire, and I look forward to sharing them with all of you. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you all soon. Goodbye, everyone.